Hello. My name is Tom Hall. I'm the director of the Sarasota Film Festival. Thank you for coming to the final in our conversation series. Today with Peter Bogdanovich, moderated by our good friend David Edelstein. A few thanks to our sponsors, the Familio Family Foundation, the Amicus Foundation, Longboat Key Club and Resort, Wild Lexus of Sarasota, and of course our friends at the Regal Entertainment Group for their sponsorship of the festival. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our friends at Sarasota Magazine for sponsoring the conversation series. We've done this every year, and as I was saying, I said before at one of the previous conversations, last year we did 150 people in a 1,000-seat theater. This year we're trying to get 1,000 people into a 100-seat theater. So it's an experiment. I'm really bad at math apparently. So thank you all for your patience, and as we try this new venue, it's a brand new venue. I think they did a lovely job with it, and I like the intimacy, so thank you. I want to bring up our moderator first, a dear friend of our festival who's been coming back year after year now to moderate these conversations and be a part of what we do at the festival. I think at this point no Sarasota Film Festival would be complete without him. Please welcome David Edelstein. And of course our guest of honor, a filmmaker who has had a real influence on me and my appreciation for movies. His books about film alone are basically a modern encyclopedia of American filmmaking. His work on Orson Welles, who the hell shot that, who the hell directed that, I mean every book that he's written is been profoundly important to my own understanding and the appreciation for movies. Not to mention his work as a director, not to mention his work as an actor. He's an incredible, incredible treasure of the American cinema, and we are so, so proud to welcome Peter Bogdanovich. So, thank you so much. If we could put our cameras away, silence our cell phones, and enjoy our conversation. Thank you.
Oh, he's written criticism himself. How quickly they forget. I'm going to, before I give him an official introduction, with your kind permission, I want to say a few words. Do you notice how people say "with your kind permission," but they actually don't get your kind permission? So do I have your say yes? Yes. Anybody no? No? F you. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I accepted after pestering Tom to invite me down here again this year. He's asked me if I wanted to talk to Peter Bogdanovich. I said, of course. Really excited. I had talked to him once before, although he didn't remember. University of Virginia, 3 years ago, they showed the Last Picture Show, and I figured they were going to be showing one of his great films and that we would talk about it. Then I learned, after I'd accepted, it was going to be associated with a film in which he was starring. I thought this could potentially be trouble because as a critic I can't lie. And if it turned out that it wasn't going to be any good, I would probably have to say so either directly or indirectly. Fortunately, when I saw, how many of you saw Pasadena yesterday? Well, you know, it was the world premiere. What's great about seeing a film like Pasadena in a public space with a full cheering house is that you can appreciate how the director, Mr. Slocum, who is here, I believe. Is he here? Oh, up there. He, in addition to being the son of one of the architects of the Iraq War, which we won't get into, he dares to stretch out these pauses to make the audience maximally uncomfortable. Would you say? People are going crazy in the first part of the movie, and then it pays off wonderfully in the second part. And I think it proves that what would be a singular autobiographical experience in the hands of a really terrific artist and an amazing cast is something universal, something that we can all relate to. The things that are said and not said, and the anger and the longing for forgiveness that can never come. So thank you for that, and thank you, Tom, for not bringing me here to support a turkey. It's very hard to have a conversation with Peter Bogdanovich because talk about 1 degree of separation. There is no one he does not seem to know, no one with whom he has not interacted, really of the greats reaching back to the beginning of cinema as an art form and beyond. I think that
I didn't know D.W. Griffin.
You didn't know D.W. But you knew assistants of D.W. Griffin.
Yeah.
And everything's, by the way, Tom, where's Tom? Is he still here? Tom promised me that the bar would be open, which I'm really pissed off about because I really wanted people to kind of get loose and relax. You're all like sitting up too straight. We're gonna have like, we're gonna be all over the place here. So because the life and the art intersect, the glory, the scandal, the tragedy. This sounds like the intro for an Olympics show. You know, there's really nothing. Everything bleeds into everything else in this amazing life, which has had, as near as I can see, you know, an amazing first act, a strange second act, you know, a wonderful third act that he's still in the middle of. And so it's my great honor to ask you, if you were telling your own story on film, what would be your opening shot?
Not this. I don't know. I have no idea. I've never thought. Maybe myself at 10 reciting a poem from my parents' company. My parents used to have. My father was a painter, an artist, and we lived in New York. And they would have dinner parties, and they'd say, "Now Peter's going to do a poem," or something, and I'd get up and do a poem by Edgar Allan Poe or something. I don't know how if the guests enjoyed it or not, but it was my first audience. It was a bunch of artists from New York.
Did you tell them that you wanted to do a poem, or they pushed you onto the
Well,
stage?
I was sort of an actor at a very young age, you know, like at 5. I was acting already all the time, so I think they just thought it might be fun. I didn't ask for it, no.
Did you ever compose a poem for the occasion?
Oh, no, God, no. I wrote some poems later when I fell in love with my first girlfriend at the age of 15 or something, 16, 15. But I'm not a poet. But I did Edgar Allan Poe, Annabelle Lee, I think, and The Raven. The Raven's a bit long, but I couldn't
Once
do it
upon a
now.
midnight dreary,
Yeah,
while
yeah.
I pondered we can wear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember any of your love poems that you could recite to us
Oh,
to your
God,
first
no.
girlfriend?
David, that was a long time ago.
But were you always, I mean, did girls loom very, very large in your imagination as a boy?
I don't know, loom. I had a girlfriend, a steady girlfriend for 5 years in high school. Thought we were going to get married. Didn't work out. She left me. And then she came back, and then I didn't take her back. Anyway, that's another story.
Good for you. Good for you. I took
I really
mine
felt
back.
bad about it. You did?
I took mine back, and a friend of mine years later, a friend said, "You know, I lost a lot of respect for you when you took her back."
Well, I didn't, David.
And that's why you're you and I'm me, sadly. But now, how did movies first enter into your consciousness? What was the first film that you remember, sort of changing your view of the world?
Oh, gee, I don't know. I know the first movie they took me to was Dumbo, and I had to be taken out of the theater. I was screaming. I think it was some kind of infantile precognition where it was all going. Get me out of here. I don't remember what films. I liked. We went to see quite a few films when I was a kid with my parents. Older films sometimes, or maybe they were new then. But I remember that when I was about 10, my favorite films were Red River, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and The Ghost Goes West.
Wow.
Those are my favorite. I must have seen The Ghost Goes West 10 times. And Red River I loved, and Yellow Ribbon. And also I loved I Was a Male War Bride.
Right. Wow.
I didn't realize at the time that Howard Hawks had directed 2 of those films. I didn't know that till about 20 years later.
Red River.
10 years later.
What did you respond to in Red River as a boy? This was in a big city. This was in New York.
Yeah.
What did you respond to about Red River?
I don't know, but they sent me to summer camp in Maine in summers, and so I learned to ride horseback. I guess I liked the horses. You know what Lee Strasberg said? They asked him what his favorite films were. He said Westerns. Why? He said, well, the horses are real.
Well, you said you were a young actor, too, so acting was your first ambition?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I vaguely remember this, but I'm not sure if I remember it because I remember it or because it was told to me so often, but on a train trip from New London, Connecticut, where we spent summers, back to New York, supposedly when I was 5, I had a plastic toy telephone, a red telephone, and I evidently entertained the entire train car with a conversation on the phone between Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Stalin. I spoke Serbo-Croatian before I spoke English, so I did Stalin in Serbo-Croatian. I can't imagine what the people in the train would thought.
Stalin would have sent you to a
said,
gulag.
"Get me the hell out of here!
Yeah.
Don't step on my jokes."
Sorry, I knew. You know what? As soon as I said that, I said, "Wait a minute. This is a guy who you do not interrupt and you do not step on his jokes." And I shall not do that again.
You're forgiven.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just don't do it again.
Thank you. Thank you. But you did actually study to be an actor. From a very young age.
The only thing I ever studied formally in show business is acting, and I studied with Stella Adler for 4 years, from the time I was 16 until I was about 19.
You know who Stella Adler? Tell her about her relationship with Strasberg.
Well, Stella
and
was the
Clurman.
great teacher of what came to be known as the method, which is a misnomer. But she's the only person in America who actually worked with Stanislavski in Paris sometime in the 30s. And she was a great teacher. You weren't allowed to join her class unless you were 18, but I lied. I was tall and said I was 18. I was 16. And I became quite close to her for over many, many years. She sort of became my second mother. And she outlived my mother by about 20 years, actually. She was a great woman, great woman. I loved her dearly. One time, I never quite understood this for many years, but she was talking about Golden Boy, a play by Clifford Odets. And the theme of the play, as you know, is sort of the conflict between success and integrity, or success and artistry. And the crisis of integrity and being honest to your core. And I was sitting over in the corner on the side of the room, and she was talking about this play, and then she pointed at me, and she said, "There he is, that's the golden boy." And I thought, what the hell is that happening? But then years later, I kind of understood it, because every time I saw her for years, she would say, "How is your integrity? Are you being honest to yourself?" and all that. She was always concerned about that. I wasn't always honest to myself, but I tried.
So does this mean you were radiating the kind of ambition that she could feel across the room?
I don't know. I wasn't very self-aware, so maybe she just felt that. I don't know.
She just looked and said, "This kid is gonna rise far, and we have to protect him from his own impulses."
Maybe. I don't know. I never talked to her about it. It's funny. She met my parents. My father was a painter, and she was she was drawn to him and to my mother, who made frames. And they became friendly.
Well, Lee Strasberg, as probably many of you know, is famous and infamous for trying to kind of give actors an emotional and spiritual enema. Basically, they have to do a lot of self-plumbing. This is the popular perception, and use their own personal life, and to the point where a lot of people, I gather he was a very bullying and dictatorial and invasive man. How was Stella different in how she taught you to act, and what do you still remember from the lessons that she taught you now that you're an actor and also having directed actors?
Well, she hated Lee. She thought Lee was completely had debased Stanislavski's technique. To put it in sort of simple terms, there's two sides of acting. The 50%, there's the external, which means a limp, an accent, facial expressions, anything that's external, costume and so on. And then there's the internal, which has to do with your thinking and your soul and your previous experiences. And Lee put all of the emphasis on the internal, and Stella said it's 50-50, darling. 50% external, 50% internal. That was the big difference. You can tell that with her most famous student, Marlon Brando, who was brilliant at sort of becoming different with, like in The Godfather, where he externally he did things, put stuff in his jaw so that he would have a stuffed jaw, and or did accents like in Streetcar or in Viva Zapata. I mean, he was definitely a Stella Adler student. 50% interior, 50% exterior.
Were you good when you were a young actor?
Pretty good, I guess. I don't know, and I did all right. Yeah.
Really? On stage?
Yeah, I was in this theater. I was involved with about 30 or 40 productions in the theater.
You did a lot of Shakespeare too, right?
Not a lot, just some.
And where just in New York in small theaters?
No, at the New York Shakespeare Festival in Central Park, and at this American Shakespeare Festival in Stratford, Connecticut.
Hmm. And what?
I didn't do a lot of Shakespeare. I played Pistol in Henry IV, Part 1 or 2. Not the whole play. We did scenes from it.
Hmm. Hmm. Do you remember any particular moment when you felt that you understood acting kind of from the inside, where you thought,
no,
oh.
There was no moment like that I can remember. I had a natural, I was good in front of an audience.
You were a ham?
Well, I don't know if it was a ham.
Were you a ham?
You can characterize it however you like. I was just, I felt comfortable in front of an audience.
Hmm. Did you, as an actor, did you need a lot of stroking, or did you have to go to the director a lot, or did you keep to yourself?
I don't think I was going to the director too much, no.
Hmm. Have you ever worked with an actor who really, really did not want to be directed, to the point where...
Not really. Not really. I've worked with some actors, you know, having been an actor, you cut to the chase sometimes with actors and you say, do it like this or try it like this, and you show them what you have in mind. Some actors hate that. And if they hate it, then I don't do it, usually. If they don't mind it, it's easier. It cuts to the, you know, it's simpler.
Wes Anderson, I know, on Royal Tenenbaums tried to direct Gene Hackman on the first day, and Hackman handed him his head. So you never directed Hackman. You never, you know, there are certain people who you just, who devour their directors.
Yeah, no, I never had that problem, really. Tim Bottoms in Last Picture Show didn't like me to show him how to do it, but sometimes I had to because he had a tin ear, and he would, you know, wouldn't get the line right. I'd say no, and I'd explain what I had in mind, and then he still wouldn't get the line right. So finally, he'd say, "Okay, how do I say it?" And I'd tell him. I gave Barbra Streisand line readings on What's Up Doc, and she said, "Are you giving me line readings?" And I said, "Well, I'm just trying to indicate, sort of, you don't have to do it exactly the way I'm saying, just indicating sort of what I have in mind." And her agent called me, "You giving Barbra Streisand line readings?" I said, "Well, she doesn't have to do it exactly that way. It just cuts through a lot of crap, because sometimes it's very difficult to explain a nuance. And you say, you know, you say it a little bit, you say it a certain way, then they get it." Well, after about 2 weeks, she'd say, "Okay, how would you say it?" And when she was singing a song, I came in the day we were singing the song in Doc, and I said, "You know that line, the song was As Time Goes By." And I said, "You know that line when it says, 'On that you can rely'?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Why don't you hit can?" She said, "Now you're telling me how to sing the goddamn song?" I thought you could try it. She did it, it worked.
But giving an actor line, don't they say you should never give an actor line readings because they have to personalize it?
Oh, that's a lot of shit. I mean, good actors don't mind that. I don't mind a line reading. Somebody gives me a line reading because it helps you to understand what you have in mind. You don't have to do it exactly that way. Now, Ernst Lubitsch, one of my favorite directors, he gave everybody not only line readings, he'd act out the whole part. And I remember I met Jack Benny one time, and I said, "You worked for Lubitsch?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Is it true that he acted out all the parts?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "How was he?" "Well, he was a little broad, but you got the idea." So sometimes you actually make it a little bit broader so that they understand what you mean, you know. I'll give you an example. In Last Picture Show, there was a line there was a line that Tim Bottoms had which causes Jeff Bridges to hit him over the head with a bottle. And the line was, "JC told me you couldn't even do it that time in Wichita Falls," meaning have sex. And he said, "JC told me you couldn't even do it that time in Wichita Falls." JC told me you couldn't even do it that time in Wichita. He hit every word but the right one. Finally, he says, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" I kept saying, "No," I kept saying, it's the action. It's the action, Tim. It's what you did. Hit that, you know." And he kept getting it wrong. Finally, I said, "JC told me you couldn't even do it that time in which..." Then he got it right.
How did you make the jump then to, you started, correct me if I'm wrong, you became a critic of sorts, or you started to haunt the screening rooms and to see everything you could get your hands on, and you fell in with a group of critics and theater repertory programmers, even people like Andrew Saris, who just passed away, who helped popularize the auteur theory in this country.
No, I started as an actor in the theater when I was 15, professionally. And I acted for about 4 years professionally, summers. And then when I was 19, I got the idea that I wanted to direct a play off Broadway. No, actually what happened was I was 19, I was sitting around a restaurant with 5 actors from Stella's studio. And I said, "Why don't I direct you guys in a scene?" Because scene class was we had scene classes, and you'd have two actors would get up and do a scene, or one actor would get up and do a monologue. And I said to these actors, why don't I direct you guys in a scene? And they would say, okay, all right.
Why? Why did you ask them?
I don't know. To this day, I don't know. I just thought, why don't I direct you guys in a scene? So then we looked for a scene with 5 good parts, and we found one in a play by Clifford Odets called The Big Knife, which is just being revived again on Broadway, off-Broadway. Anyway, and so we brought the scene in, we rehearsed it, and I directed it, and we brought it into Stella's, and the 5 actors got up on the stage, did the scene, and Stella got up and she said, "Brilliant, darlings, brilliant, but you've been directed. Who directed you?" And they all pointed at me. I was leaning against the back wall of the room, and they said, "Peter." And she turned to me and she said, "Bravo, darling, brilliant." So I thought, well, maybe I'll direct this whole play. And then I knew somebody in class knew Clifford Odets and gave me his address, and I wrote him a letter. I remember I typed it. And a long letter, 2 pages, single-spaced. Have no idea what it said. And but all I know is 2 weeks later I got a handwritten response from Clifford Odets on 20th Century Fox stationery. My mother came in, she said, in the morning, wake me up, she said, "You have a letter from Hollywood." And it was a letter from Clifford saying, "You have herein my permission to do The Big Knife," and so on and so forth. And I remember I was walking down the street later that day, and I felt like I was about 2, 3, or 4 inches above the ground. I never felt that way again. It was extraordinary. It took me 9 months to raise the $15,000 we needed to put on the show, and we put it on and opened in November of 1959. I was 20, and it ran 63 performances. The person who I gave one of the leading roles to an Irish actor who had been in America for a while but hadn't gotten a part, and this was his first big part. And later on, his wife told me that in order to come in to see me on the subway, they had to turn in Coke bottles, you know, for you get the deposit, 5 cents, and he had to do that. Carroll O'Connor. Yeah, he got an agent and never looked back. I didn't see him until this was 59. I didn't see him again until 1972 when we were both up for Golden Globes. And I was up for a picture show, and he was up for All in the Family. And he told the story about how I cast him. He said there was a young director, an arrogant young director. He's sitting down there right now. And so on, anyway.
The A word, even then you got slapped with the A word.
Even then.
You've lost it since, though, right? You don't hear it much more anymore.
You know, they don't. You get to be old enough, they leave you alone. Somebody said, "You're a legend." I said, "You know how you get to be a legend? How? You survive."
Yeah.
They try to kill you, they don't succeed, you're a legend.
But you meanwhile, in order to get to movies, at what point did you decide that you didn't want to do theater anymore, that you wanted to do movies?
No, I never decided I didn't want to do theater. I always wanted to do movies. I did the theater as a way of getting into movies. In fact, the 2 plays I did in New York, I did The Big Knife, which was about Hollywood, and we ran 63 performances. It went all right. We got pretty good reviews, got better reviews than the original production, which had been directed, incidentally, by Lee Strasberg. And then I was asked to do a season of summer theater in 1961, and I was the artistic director for the season in Phoenicia, New York. Yeah, I was born near there, born in Kingston. Anyway.
Wow.
We did 10 plays, of which I directed 4 of them, and that's where I met my first wife. And we had a big hit with a play called Once in a Lifetime, about Hollywood, by George Kaufman and Moss Hart. And I thought this was terrific, and we brought it to New York after a lot of anxiety and troubles and so on. We had trouble raising the money. It's a long story. Polly scared off the one investor we had, and it's a long story.
Polly, your wife, Polly,
Yeah,
Polly Platt.
Yeah, right. First wife. Anyway, and that was, we did Once in a Lifetime in '64, and it was a flop. And
Just like the play within the play.
right.
It's a play about a flop, so an allegory.
Yeah, is it?
Isn't
Anyway.
it? Or maybe that's Light Up the
You're
Sky.
thinking of another play.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a flop, and 5 months later, on Frank Tashlin, the director, friend of ours, on his suggestion, we moved to California, because by then I had been writing I had done what you brought up before. I had
The C word.
I started writing about movies for various places, program notes for theaters, for film societies, and I eventually graduated to the Museum of Modern Art when I was still pretty young, 21 I think, and I did monographs on and programmed retrospectives, the first in the United States, of Orson Welles and Howard Hawks and Alfred Hitchcock, and was writing, and then again by accident met a managing editor of Esquire and started writing for Esquire, and I was doing that as a way of making money before I would direct another play or something like that. And Frank Tashlin, after we had this flop, came to New York and he said, well, why, do you want to make movies or do you want to direct theater? I said, I want to make movies. He said, well, we make them in L.A., you know.
You know who Frank Tashlin is? He did The Girl Can't Help It.
Real Success, Spoil Rock Hunter.
Yeah, and the greatest Lewis comedy, the greatest Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin comedies.
Yeah.
And also, did he do Son of Paleface?
Yeah.
And he began as a Warner animator. Fantastic figure, you know. And you helped, you know, rediscover him or bring him to a larger audience, right?
Yeah, I guess I did. Yeah. Anyway, we moved to California in '64, middle of '64, and by the middle of '65, I met Roger Corman, and that got me into pictures.
How did Roger Corman give you your first shot at writing a picture? Wasn't it a motorcycle film?
Yeah. Well, I met him at a performance of a film called Bas des Anges, Bay of Angels, and he was with somebody who knew somebody that I was with, and we got introduced. And he recognized my name from Esquire. He said, you're a writer. I said, yeah. He said, you write for Esquire? I said, yeah. He said, would you be interested in writing a movie? I said, yeah.
That was easy.
Very easy. And next thing I knew, we had a job writing a script. Polly and I, had a job writing a script for him. But before we could even start on that, he had said, I want you to write a script for me, kind of a mixture of a combination of Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia, but cheap. So we came up with a story which we started to work on. It was based on a true World War II event. Anyway, before we had a chance to really even start, he called me and he said, would you come over to the office? He said, I'm making a movie called The Wild Angels. It wasn't called The Wild Angels then, but anyway. And he said, the script just came in, and I just spent an hour on my first note to the writer, and he's being very difficult. I'd like you to read it and tell me what you think. So I went to the office, read it, and I said, it's terrible. He said, yeah, I know. He said, I'll pay you $300 to do a rewrite. No credit. So I said, okay. So I rewrote the script, about 80% of it, and that's what he shot. And that was The Wild Angels. Then he had another crisis. George Chakiris, who'd won an Oscar for West Side Story, was supposed to play the lead, and he quit before we started shooting. He said, this is an immoral script. All right, so it's an immoral script. Anyway, so Roger said, what do we do? I don't think so. So Roger said, what am I going to do? We haven't got a leading man. I said, well, you got Peter Fonda in this subsidiary role. Maybe he could play the lead. He said, "You think he could?" I said, "I don't know. Why don't we have him come in?" So I'd only seen him in playing a preppy kid in Lilith, but it was Peter Fonda, big name, Henry Fonda. So he came in, and he came in wearing a leather jacket and aviator glasses, perfect for a biker. And he sat there and we talked for about 40 minutes, he and Roger and I. And at one point he took his glasses off and cleaned them and put them back on again, and then we talked some more, and then he left. Roger says to me, "So what do you think?" I said, "Well, if he doesn't take his glasses off, he can do it. Don't let him take his glasses off." And if you see the picture of the Wild Angels, he takes his glasses off once and it's a disaster, but other than that, he's fine.
Because his features are very aristocratic.
Well, his eyes are just they didn't look like a biker. That's all I can say. The glasses gave him the thing. So that led for him to Easy Rider, which was a major hit. But we did the Wild Angels, and Roger had trouble with the real Hells Angels who were on the picture. They hated him. He'd say, "Okay, start your bikes." And they'd go, "Doesn't work." They just hated him. So we lost time, and finally Roger kept saying, "I'm not going to do this. We'll do the second unit. Second unit." And he shot for 3 weeks, wrapped. Are you falling asleep, David?
No, I'm thinking as you. But thank you for.
I'll wake you when I'm done with this story.
No, See, this is a true director because he's looking one way and you think he doesn't notice you. But a really great film director has the most 20/20 peripheral vision of any other creature in the world, right?
You kind of have to know what's going on around you. Anyway, I can't remember where I was now. So Roger kept dumping everything into second unit. He shot for 3 weeks, wrapped the picture. I said, "Roger, there's a lot to shoot." He says, "Second unit." I said, "Who's going to do the second unit?" "I don't care who does the second unit. Anybody can do the second unit. My secretary can do the second unit. You can do the second unit." "I'd like to do the second unit." "All right." And that's how I got to direct the second unit, which was actually the first unit, because we shot. Second unit means you don't work with the principals. You do stuff with supporting actors or extras or stunt people, but I actually worked with the leads. I worked with Peter and Nancy Sinatra and Bruce Dern. Shot for a week with the first unit, and then shot 2 more weeks with ever decreasing crew, till finally it was just the cameraman and me. And but I learned a lot. And then Roger calls me in the office one day. He says, "Your stuff doesn't cut." I said, "What do you mean it doesn't cut?" The editor was Monty Hellman. He was another director. He says, "Monty says the stuff doesn't cut." I said, "Well, let me go see it." He said, "Well, go see it." So I looked at it, and it was cut wrong. I said to Roger, "It's cut wrong." He said, "Well, then you cut it." I said, "Well, I don't know how to cut a machine. I don't know how to cut." He said, "Well, you don't know how to use a cutting machine?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, go downstairs. Dennis will show you." So in 15 minutes, the dentist showed me how to use the machine. They sent it to my house in the valley, and I cut my own stuff. And Roger put it in the picture. It was fine.
And did you learn how not to cut from Monty Hellman, who became a very interesting director in his own right?
No, he just didn't. I shot it exactly. It had to be cut exactly the way I shot it. It wasn't like you could fool around with it. And he just didn't understand what I had in mind. So I just did it myself. But I learned a lot from that. And then when I made my first film for Roger, which was a picture with Boris Karloff called Targets, I actually cut it myself. And then, as luck would have it, I ended up cutting the last picture show myself. I mean, physically cutting it. Both of those 2 films, which I learned a great deal about what not to do. And have been a very economical director as a result ever since.
Targets, if you could talk a little bit about Targets, has everybody here seen it, or have many people seen it? It really holds up. It's a very prescient film. Boris Karloff plays an aging horror film star. It's basically the collision between old-fashioned fairy tale moral horror and completely amoral, random, modern psychoses in the person of based on the guy at University of Texas who climbed into the tower and started picking off people at random. Where the hell did that idea come from to juxtapose those two ideas, and how did those two kinds of horror, and how did somebody give you money for it?
Well, Roger put up all the money for the picture. Roger said, Boris Karloff owes me 2 days' work. That's how it started. He owes me 2 days' work. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get Karloff, shoot 20 minutes in 2 days. You can shoot 20 minutes in 2 days. I've shot all pictures in 2 days. Which he has. And he said, now you shoot 20 minutes of new Karloff footage in 2 days, and then take 20 minutes of Karloff footage from another picture I made called The Terror. Not a great picture, but you can find 20 minutes of Karloff footage. Then work with some other actors for 10 days and shoot another 40 minutes, and now I'll have a new 80-minute Karloff picture. You interested? Oh, sure. So that was a challenging request, so we couldn't figure out what the hell to do with Boris in 2 days. And The Terror wasn't just not a very good picture, it was one of the worst pictures ever made.
Wait a minute, wasn't The Terror made because he had a few days left of Karloff's contract on The Raven?
I think so.
And so they threw together The Terror with all these different directors coming in?
Yes,
Jack
Roger
Nicholson was in it, and Nicholson was in The
I was
Terror.
convinced that Jack Nicholson was the worst actor in history because he was so bad in this movie playing a French soldier. You know, I've got a place for you on the Place de la Concorde. Poor Jack. Anyway, we looked at The Terror, and I couldn't think how to take 3 minutes out of it, much less 20. So we just, and then when we went to New York at some point in this period, Harold Hayes, the legendary editor of Esquire, in this heyday in the 60s, said, why don't you do a movie about that guy in Texas that shot all those people? Charles Whitman was his name. And I said, I don't want to do that. And then back in California, I was shaving one morning trying to figure out what the hell to do with Karloff. And I thought of a joke. Literally, I thought this would be funny. I was being sarcastic. I said, picture begins, The Terror comes to an end, we're in a projection room, the lights come up, Boris is sitting next to Roger, he turns to Roger and says, that is the worst fucking movie I've ever seen. And then I said, wait a second, that's not a bad idea. What if Karloff is an actor who decides that horror isn't, his kind of Victorian horror isn't horrible anymore? Then I can excuse all the footage because it's not, I didn't direct it, it's some movie he made. And that was how the idea came in. I thought, well, maybe Charles Whitman, and then it sort of began to sort of, you know, two stories converging. You only see them together in one shot.
Right. At the very end in the drive-in.
The very end of the picture. And then we wrote a script. Roger said, this is very interesting, but how can you shoot? Well, actually, we wrote a script, and then I went to see a friend of mine, Samuel Fuller, a great action director, a great director, and a great friend of mine at that time. And Sammy sort of rewrote the script for me in about 2 hours, pacing up and down in his living room. Gave me great ideas, and we wrote them. I wrote them down, and we presented it to Roger, and Roger said, this is the best script I've ever had to produce. But I don't see how you can possibly shoot all this with Karloff in 2 days. You'll have to cut the script. I said, you just said it was good, Roger. If I cut it, it won't be so good anymore. He said, well, I can't. Anyway, long story short, he paid for Karloff for 5 days. And we made we shot half the picture in 5 days, and the other half in whatever was left. But the whole picture was done in 23 days.
And you played opposite. All your scenes were played opposite Karloff.
Yeah, I put myself in it because I had written the part for a friend of mine, and he couldn't do it, so I thought, well, I'll just use myself. I'll just play it myself. I just didn't want to think about who to cast, because the part was a young director, and I'd written it for a dear friend, and he couldn't come, and so I just thought, well, I'll just do it myself. And then, so I did.
Karloff, one of the most universally beloved of all the old actors? Did you found that to be the case?
Oh, Boris was wonderful. He was 79 at the time. He had emphysema. He had, what do you call it, on both of his braces on both of his legs. He couldn't walk and talk at the same time. It was very difficult for him. But he was a real trooper. Yeah, you know what a trooper is?
Trouper.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
My favorite story about that is W.C. Fields. How many of you know W.C. Fields? You heard of him? He's the one who said, anybody who hates children and dogs can't be all bad. Well, he did a picture with baby Leroy, who was 2 years old, or a year and a half, and he hated this kid. So he spiked the kid's formula with gin. Well, the kid got a little sick and had to be taken off the set, and Fields is watching him take him off. A kid's no trooper.
You at the same time as all this was happening that you talked about, you developed relationships with many of the great Hollywood, undersung in many cases, Hollywood directors. You were very influenced by the politique des auteurs. My French sucks, but that's.
That was perfect.
Thank you. And this rediscovery, Francois Truffaut was one of the young Cahiers critics, and
Godard and all of these guys.
Yeah, and you guys were coming to people like Ford and Hawks and seeing them from a new perspective and discovering connections, among the works that in the way one would do from a novelist, from novel to novel. How did you come to love that theory and subscribe to it, seeing the personality of the director in every frame of the film, A, and B, how did you seek out, I mean, it's been said that you acquired many of these men as sort of father figures. You went and you actively sought them out, and they kind of adopted you.
Well, it started sort of by accident, again, like most of the things in my life. I've been writing about movies, and suddenly Film Quarterly, does it still exist, Film Quarterly?
Oh, I don't know.
Anyway, it was a little film magazine that came out every 4 times a year. Anyway, they asked me to interview Sidney Lumet, who was young at the time. He'd only done 4 movies, so I went and interviewed him, and they published it and so on. And then after doing the Orson Welles monograph and retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, I had developed a tremendous interest in Howard Hawks, because I had seen, I came to realize that some of my favorite movies from a child were directed by him, and he directed several movies that I really loved, and I wanted to see everything he'd ever made. So I had the idea that Paramount was releasing his latest film, Hatari, and I called a friend of mine at Paramount and I said, listen, if I can get the Museum of Modern Art to do a retrospective of Hawks in connection with Hatari opening, would you guys pay for it? Because I knew the museum needed money. So he said, sure. So I called the museum, Dick Griffith at the museum, and I said, Dick, if I can get Paramount to pay for it, would the museum do a retrospective of Howard Hawks? He said, in a heartbeat. So that was that. And that was how I first got paid by a Hollywood studio. Paramount paid me $125 a week to put this thing together, and we showed every Howard Hawks film that was extant. And that's how I got to see Howard Hawks, and I got to meet him. Went to California and interviewed him, and got to be quite friendly with him. He was one of the first directors I really became very friendly with. He was great. I loved Howard Hawks.
And then Ford, you went to Ford?
Well, Ford, that happened shortly after Hawks. I suggested to Esquire, to Harold Hayes at Esquire, that I'd like to do a piece about John Ford, who was doing a movie in Monument Valley called Cheyenne Autumn. And it was anyway, it's a long story, but I was going to do about Jimmy Stewart, John Ford, and Spencer Tracy. We're all supposed to be doing this movie. We were going to call it Three Old Men. Tracy then dropped out, and Stewart had finished shooting. So I said, let me just do John Ford. And reluctantly, Esquire agreed to do it, and I did a piece called The Autumn of John Ford, and that's when I met him, and that was the beginning of a tumultuous relationship that went on till he died. And I did a documentary about him and a book about him and all that.
Tumultuous. You.
Well, he could be very difficult. He could be very crusty, to put it mildly. Bogdanovich, is that all you can do is ask questions? Have you never even heard of the declarative sentence?
You were a good interviewer.
Yeah, well.
You didn't hold forth like me. How about Wells? You had a very volatile relationship with Wells.
Well, that also started with the music. It started with a review, with a program note I wrote for the New Yorker Theater, which was a marvelous, short-lived theater in New York that programmed American classics. That was their idea, which was unusual in the time, 1960. And I wrote a program note saying that Othello, Orson Welles' Othello, was the best Shakespeare film ever made. Well, this was very contrary to the popular opinion. That the common wisdom at the time was that Olivier made the best Shakespeare films. And I said, well, they're film theater. Wells is a movie. Anyway, I get a call from Dick Griffith asking me to write and curate an Orson Welles retrospective. I said, why don't you do it, Dick? You usually do those things yourself. He said, I don't like Orson Welles, he said. But we have many members of the museum who do like him, and many people in Europe, and we'd like to do an Orson Welles retrospective, and we think you're a partisan and you should do it. So I wrote the monograph and did the show and so on, and sent the monograph off to somewhere in Europe where Orson was shooting The Trial. 7 years later, I get a call one morning. He's Peter Bogdanovich there? I said, speaking. He says, hello, this is Orson Welles. I said, oh, wow, hi, how are you? I can't tell you how long I've wanted to meet you. I said, wait a minute, that's my line. Why would you want to meet me? Because you have written the truest words ever written about me in English. What are you doing tomorrow? Can you come over to the Beverly Hills Hotel and have a drink? And so that's how I met him. And that became quite a relationship, yeah. That went on for quite a while.
Well, you actually had spectacular success at a time when he was having a lot of trouble funding his films. So I gather there might have been a bit of jealousy on his part toward you, a great admirer of his and a student of his.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, obviously, some antipathy develops eventually, but I don't really want to get into that. He was a great friend for a while, and we had a lot of great times together, and I loved him.
Didn't you tell people that he suggested doing the Last Picture Show in black and white?
Well, that came from a conversation we had one morning at breakfast at his house, at a house he was renting in Beverly Hills. And I said, you know, I want to do this. He hated the script, by the way, of The Last Picture Show. He said, it's a dirty movie. And then when he saw the film, he said, that's not the script I read. I said, yes, it is. No, it isn't. You transformed it anyway. Anyway, but I said, I'd like to get that depth of field that you had in Citizen Kane and in Touch of Evil, you know, where everything's sharp. You'll never get it in color. Well, they've got faster film now, Orson, you know, you'll never get it in color. Well, what am I going to do? Why don't you shoot it in black and white? Well, I don't know if they'd let me. Have you asked? No, why don't you ask? So I went to Bert Schneider and I said, I'd like to shoot it in black and white. He said, why? I didn't say because Orson suggested it. I said, because I think we can get the feeling of the period better and quicker, the early 50s, in black and white. And Orson, of course, had said, great thing. He says, you know what I say about black and white? What? It's the actor's friend. Why is that, Orson? Because every performance looks better in black and white. Name me a great performance in color. So I said to Bert Schneider, who was the producer, I said, I think the performances will look better, and the period is easier to capture, and so on. And he said, let me talk to my brother. His brother was head of Columbia at the time. And he came back a week later and said, okay, shoot it in black and white. And then it was that easy. And then, and there hadn't been a major studio release in black and white for about 4 or 5 years. And a few years later, I asked him why he had let me do it in black and white, and he said to me, I thought it would be a novelty.
Well, the film is a novelty in so many ways. I mean, you made it at the height of the counterculture, and yet it's apart from its sexual frankness, it actually is a very loving look back in a very classical, in a beautifully austere classical style that really ran counter to so much of the filmmaking in that period. So much of the stuff you would see from Friedkin stuff or Rafelson stuff, or people who were sort of embracing the noise of the 60s. Why did you decide that this was going to be your next feature? I know Sal Mineo gave you the book. What about it made you think, against all this other stuff going on, that this was the film that you had to do now?
Well, I liked the book. I thought the book was very interesting. It touched me. It's not a great book, but it's got great dialogue, and the characters were very interesting, and I just liked it. And I thought, honestly, David, the thing that really propelled me was that I didn't know how to do it. And I thought, if I don't know how to do it, I feel that anything can be made into a movie. So I thought, well, I'm going to figure out how to do this. And as I was trying to figure out how to do it, I sort of thought I should really make this picture. And the sexual candor of it was very important, and I thought we really have to do it honestly then. And I told it in a what you could characterize as a classic American filmmaking, classic American filmmaking. But the story itself and what we portrayed was anything but classic. It was, John Wayne said to me, Jesus, Pete, I can't show that picture to my family. Jesus. And that was sort of the general prevailing attitude of the old guard, all that nudity, and well, there wasn't that much nudity. It was about 7 seconds, but it seemed like there was more, and there was a lot of sex in it. So I think the tension between the sexual content and the sort of classical way it was shot, which I didn't think of as classical, just see the way I'd learned to make pictures. I think that tension was what made it interesting.
That's what made every frame alive in that movie, instead of pictorial. Instead of pictorial, what was the first, speaking of pictorial, what was the first image that you got from that movie when you sat down with that material? What was the first guiding image for you when you saw, oh yes, that's the look I need, that's what I want?
David, that didn't happen for a while. I got to be quite friendly with the greatest director who ever lived, Jean Renoir. I think he was the best. The French New Wave thought he was the best too. They called him le patron, the boss. So I said to Renoir one time, when you start a picture, Jean, do you know what it's going to look like? And he said, of course not. If I know what the picture will look like, I have no reason to make the picture. That's heavenly, that answer. So I've often said that I don't really know what the picture's going to look like till I start to see it. And when I see it, I say, oh, that's what it's going to look like. That really is true. I think the first time I got a feeling of what it was going to look like was when we found the town that we shot in, which was Archer City, which was Larry McMurtry, the author's hometown. Driving into that town the first time, it looked, it looked like the picture. It looked like the town in the book. I said, this looks like the town in the book. He said, well, it is. So that was about it.
That film became, unfortunately, one of the things that most people remember from that book is you're falling in love with your leading lady, and all sorts of tensions, romantic and personal and emotional tensions. Everybody seemed to be having a really hard time emotionally on that film. That, of course, would come out to be a masterpiece, but kind of left everybody's life changed. 6 months afterwards, no one's life was the same.
No, it was a tumultuous experience. We went down as one bunch of people, and we left as another bunch of people. My father had a stroke suddenly and died during the picture, and I went to the funeral and went back to shoot a funeral of Ben Johnson. I fell in love with Sybil. My marriage fell apart. Just everything changed. Everything changed.
And there was it Jeff Bridges was also in love, or was it Bottoms who was in love with Sybil as well?
Everybody was in love with Sybil. To the best of my knowledge, everybody was crazy about her. But I won. I beat out Elvis Presley, too, by the way.
Oh, that was earlier, wasn't it?
No, that was later. He proposed to her while we were living together at the Sunset Tower. She told me this later. He proposed to her and offered her a ring, and she said, no, she turned him down. He says, you mean you're going to go back to McDonaldville? He screwed up my name somehow. But, yeah, well, that was the beginning of a long relationship that didn't go down too well with the press. We went through a period of time where you couldn't open a magazine or a newspaper without some nasty crack about Sybil and me. It was terrible. Cary Grant, who became a friend, called me and he says, Peter, will you for Christ's sake stop telling people you're happy? And stop telling them you're in love. Why, Cary? Because they're not happy and they're not in love. I thought all the world loves a lover. No, don't you believe it. I didn't think he was right, but he was.
And so was this image of Bogdanovich, the brat, the monster, the arrogant,
Yeah, that all started with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had 3 big successes in a row, too. That'll irritate people.
True. You had a huge opening at Radio City. You decided to go into semi-Howard Hawks territory with your next film. Go a 180-degree angle. You'd made this gorgeous mood tone poem, in the Last Picture Show, and then you decided you were going to go for explosive, exuberant slapstick. You were going to create a modern bringing up baby.
Well, thank you, but I didn't decide. I've noticed as we go through this interview that most of these things just happened. I didn't really decide anything.
But the auteur theory, doesn't the auteur theory say that, it's all the genius of the director choosing the...
No, I think that the auteur theory says that no matter what the material is, the director brings his own personality to it.
Okay.
And with What's Up, Doc, Barbra Streisand saw the Last Picture Show before it came out, long before it came out. She saw a work print, and she wanted to make a picture with me. She wanted to work with me. And they offered me a script, and I put at Warner Brothers, and I said, I don't like this script. I don't want to do this. And John Calley called me into his office. He was the head of Warner Brothers, and he said, now, Peter, Barbara wants to make a picture with you. I said, well, John, I don't like this script. He says, well, look, he says, if you had to make a picture with Barbara, what would you do? I said, well, I don't know. I'd do kind of a screwball comedy, like Bringing Up Baby. Daffy girl, square professor, everything works out, like. He says, do that. Really? He says, yeah, who would you get to write it? Well, I don't know, Benton and Newman. I used to work with them at Esquire, and they had written Bonnie and Clyde. He says, good, we just did a picture with them. Get them. Can I produce it? Sure. So I left. Now, picture show hadn't opened, and I was directing the next and producing the next Barbra Streisand movie. So Benton and Newman came out. I said, I called them, and they said, we only have 3 weeks. I said, well, if Howard Hawks and Ben Hecht can write Scarface in 11 days, I suppose we can write a script in 3 weeks. So they came out, and we worked, and we did a script in 3 weeks, and it wasn't that good.
Was it the other way around, though, at first? Wasn't the woman the buttoned up, uptight one, and the guy crazy and wacky? I had read that somewhere. Wrong. Okay. But Streisand didn't want to do this, right? You had to convince her up until the last day of shooting and beyond, right? This would be a bad move for her, right?
She never really liked the whole idea. Well, Buck Henry did the final draft that we shot, and he did a really good job. And Barbara's reaction was sort of summed up in something she said. She said, "Barbra Streisand in What's Up, Doc?" She thought it was beneath her. But, you know, she's such a good comedian that it's easy for her. It's no stretch for her. She can do it in her sleep. So that's why she wasn't particularly interested. She kept saying to me, "I want to do a drama with you." I said, "I just did a drama." She said, "Well," she said, "I just did a comedy." I said, "Well," so I won, but I must say we had a lot of fun making. Of all the pictures I've made, I had the most fun doing that picture.
Really?
Oh God, it was just a ball.
You cast Madeline. You gave Madeline Connor first role.
Her first
right?
picture, yeah, Madeline.
And she was so wonderful in that movie.
So
too.
funny. Barbara wasn't thrilled with that.
Because
Madeline got, you know, we had a table reading on a soundstage at Warner Brothers, and everybody was there. The cast was there, and Barbara didn't get one laugh. And Madeline would say Howard, and everybody would fall down.
Oh my God.
So Barbara said, "I'm an extra in this picture. I'm an extra."
She sounds like an absolute nightmare.
No, she was fun.
No, didn't Wyler say? Didn't somebody ask? Wasn't she giving lip to Wyler on Funny Girl, and William Wyler, the great director, was making Funny Girl, and didn't he famously say, It's okay. This is the first picture she's directed."
That's funny. It's a good line. Now, she said to me, before we did the picture, she said, "You know, I've never been directed." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I've never really been directed." "Really? Wyler didn't direct you?" She said, "No." So then when I was making the picture, I'd say, "No, don't do that, do this." And she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm directing." This is directing. And that was the joke all through the picture. "I'm directing, Barbara. This is directing." "Can I have a moment here?" "No moments." I remember at the end of the picture, Ryan says in the script, he says, "About those things I said back there, I'm sorry." And Barbara's line was, "Love means never having to say you're sorry," right? So 2 weeks before we shot that scene, I said to Barbara, "I want you to go, 'Love means never having to say you're sorry.'" "With the blink?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, with the blink." She said, "Why?" And I don't know, it just takes the heat off the line. Makes it clear that you're kidding. Then she went to everybody on the set. "What do you think is better? Love means never having to say you're sorry." Or "Love means never having to say you're sorry." She said it to Ryan first. Ryan says, "I don't know, Barbara, ask Peter." So the day we were shooting it, she said, "Let's shoot it 2 ways." I said, "No." "Why not? We shoot it 2 ways. We shoot it with the blink and without the blink." I said, "No, we're shooting with the blink." "What is the kind of big deal? It was take a few seconds to shoot it without the blink." I said, "You know why, Barbara, we're not going to do it? Because from now until forever, whichever one we use, you'll say, if I use the blink, you'll say we should have used the other one. So we're going to make the decision right now. We're doing it with the blink." Shh. This is directing.
You showed the film I read to Alfred Hitchcock, who had a very, very strange reaction to the chase. Do I have this right? There was a chase. I read this years ago. The chase scene. There's a gag, an elaborate gag involving a plate glass window. Yeah. Did Hitchcock give you a note about this, or am I fantasizing?
No, I don't know that he even saw the picture.
Okay. Here's the story that I remember reading years ago, that he told you that just when you expect somebody to go through the plate glass and break it, they should go through it and not break it.
No, never happened.
I always thought Hitchcock said that?
No, he didn't say that.
That is completely whack.
No, actually, David, he never said that.
But you did show him, you did bring your work to him at a certain point,
No, I didn't.
right? No?
He told me he saw targets. I remember there was a screening of Frenzy, I think, at Arthur Knight's class. Arthur Knight was a teacher and a critic. And Hitch was there, and he invited me to be there with him. And his wife was there and so on. And he went up on stage, and some of the students said, "What films by young directors do you like, Mr. Hitchcock?" And Hitch said, "Well, I like The Last Movie Show and What's Up, Doc." That's because I was in the audience. Everybody laughed. But he got the title wrong, The Last Movie Show.
So you, then somebody gave you Addie Pray, which...
No, then we were going to do a Western.
Oh my God, that's right. You were going to do Lonesome Dove, right?
Yeah, well, you just blew that story.
Yeah.
Don't overact, David.
Sorry, thank you. Okay.
Take it down a notch.
Thank you. Okay.
Let's take that again, David. I wouldn't react that big.
Okay.
It just looks sullen. Anyway, as he just blew the story, Larry McMurtry and I worked on a script that was going to star John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Henry Fonda, Sybil Shepherd, the Clancy brothers, Cloris Leachman, Ben Johnson, and Ellen Burstyn. And it was a terrific idea, and Larry and I worked on it for a while. Larry wrote 350 pages of screenplay. I cut it down to about 150. It was called Streets of Laredo. And we sent it to the three main stars, and Fonda said, "I'll do it in a second." Jimmy said, "Well, yeah. Why do I let the horses go?" And I said, "Well, we have to shore that up in the script. We'll make that a little bit clearer in the script, Jimmy." "Yeah, all right. And Duke turned it down. "Well, it's kind of an end of the Western, Pete, and I'm not ready to hang up my spurs yet." "But you don't die in the picture, Duke." "I know, but everybody else does." So he turned it down. I found out some years later that John Ford had told him to turn it down. But that's okay. I mean, Ford liked me, but he wasn't going to give me his three biggest stars on his deathbed. So, he to convince Duke not to do it. So I went to Jimmy and I said, "Well, Jimmy, Duke's not going to do it." "Well, if Duke's not going to do it, why do I let the horses go?" So he didn't do it. So I said, "To hell with it. Larry, look, write it as a novel. I'm not going to do this with anybody else." And 13 years later he did, and it became Lonesome Dove, which won the Pulitzer Prize, and which won...
Sorry.
Anything for a laugh.
Prop humor.
Which became a bestseller and won the Pulitzer Prize. So, with no picture to do, Paramount offered me a film called, based on a novel called Addie Pray. And I read it and thought it was okay, and eventually came around to making it, and it became Paper Moon. But what happened was, whenever I do a period picture, and this was 30s, I always looked through the list of songs that were hits in that period and before. And because I don't use a score, I usually use songs from the period with the records, original recordings usually. So I was going through this list of song titles, and there's one came up from 36 or 35 or something called "It's Only a Paper Moon," written by Yip Harburg and it was Harold Arlen, I think. Anyway, and I thought the two words jumped out at me, "Paper Moon." Gee, that's a good title. And I went to Paramount. I said, I want to call it Paper Moon. They said, why? I said, well, it's a good title, isn't it? No. Addie Pay was a bestseller. I said, well, how many books did it sell? 100,000 copies. Oh, gee, if we get 100,000 people to see the movie, we'll have a big hit. All right, Peter, look, let's not have an argument. We'll call it Addie Pray for now, all right? I thought, I think it's a good title. So I called Orson, who was in Rome cutting a picture. It was a bad connection. And I said, Orson, can you hear me? I can't talk, I'm cutting. Well, let me just ask you a question. What do you think of this title? Paper Moon. That title is so good, you don't even need to make the picture. Just release the title. So armed with that, I went to Alvin Sargent, who was the writer on the script, and I said, Alvin, you know that scene, we have a carnival scene in the picture, yeah? He says, I said, let's put, you know those cardboard moons they used to have in carnivals, you could sit in the moon and have your picture taken? He says, yeah. I said, put that in the scene. Let's put that in the scene. Why? I said, so we can call the damn thing Paper Moon, and the studio won't say why. Okay, and then we figured out a way to really work it into the story and paid it off at the end and so on. But that's how Paper Moon got started.
It's a beautiful, beautiful film, and actually surprisingly dark. I remember when I saw it, you know, as a kid, being very elated at the end, but I saw it again a few years ago and realized it's a story about those people are heading into a very dark future at the end of the film. It's not really a happy ending. Again, it's the counterpoint of a song like Paper Moon with actually a fair amount of reality, a bitter reality in there.
Well, thank you, David. You're the first person that's ever said that, and that's how I felt about the picture. I thought it was a sort of sad ending because she ended up with what she wanted, but her father wasn't the best idea for her. She'd have been better off staying with her aunt, but you know, she loved him, and kids love their fathers, even if the fathers are which Ryan turned out to be.
Well, you had a tough time with, I mean, she won an Oscar for the film. She's brilliant in it, but you actually had to work very hard to get that performance out of her, didn't you?
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, she was 8 years old and she turned 9 at the end of the picture. I mean, she was just a kid. She never acted before. Of course she had to be directed, but she could do it. And when she did it, it was good, you know? I mean, I would show her what to do, but when she did it, it was funny. Me doing it wouldn't have worked. But there's one scene in the picture at the end of the first act. I said to Alvin Sargent, you know, we need a scene at the end of the first act where they have a huge argument and then they end up like getting along better than they have, and we know that they're going to stay together. That should be the end of the first act. Big argument, big fight, they almost break up and then they end up together. He said, okay, and he wrote a very good scene where they argue about, what do you mean there's no more Bibles? Why didn't you tell me there's no more Bibles? Well, you look in the box too. Oh, you got an excuse for everything. You blame me. Big fight. And all Ryan had to do was drive the car, which he wasn't even driving the car. We were pulling it on a camera car. And she had to have all these lines, a lot of business. You know, she had to take her cigar box, put it back, open it up, take a map out, open the map up, put the radio in the back seat. She had and it was about a 4.5, 5-page scene. And I decided that it had to be done in one shot. No cutting. Camera just watches the two of them in a 2-shot, and we do the whole scene with no cut. Well, that was not so easy. Now, there was a stretch of road, there was only a mile of road where there were no anachronisms, or signs that weren't period or whatever. So we were pulling the car, and there was a cop in front of us to make sure that nobody got in the way. And if we made a mistake, we couldn't turn around because the car was being pulled. So we had to go the whole mile and a little bit further than a mile, find a place to pull in, back up, turn around, go back up, turn around, get in position again. So we'd start the scene, and Tatum would forget the second line, and we'd, oh Christ. So we'd go down and turn around. We did it 25 times the first day.
Oh my God.
We never got halfway through it. And everybody said, why don't you do it in cuts, Peter? You know, do it in cuts. I said, no. Got to do it in one. Now, there was method to my madness. I thought, if we can do this in one shot, without any manipulation in the cutting, the audience will believe that she did everything, because she had to do this. If she can do this, she can do anything. Even though a lot of the rest of it was manipulated. And, you know, we didn't get it the first day. Ryan came after the 25th take, said, I did 5 years of Peyton Place. I can't stand it. I'm going to kill her. And we'll get it, Ryan. 2 days later, we came back, because it rained for 2 days. We came back, we did it, we got it on the 15th take. But when you see the movie, including me when I see the movie, I say, Jesus Christ, look at that. She did that. She actually did that. And it's one of the hardest scenes in the picture. So she did it. You know, she deserved her Oscar.
That's what bonded the audience with her in that
yeah,
moment.
because the audience doesn't notice if it's in one shot or not. Audiences don't notice those things, but they feel it.
They do, yeah.
And they feel, wow, that kid, look at this kid. And I have seen the picture a number of times when I tear up at that scene, because I think, she did it. Kid did it.
Jesus, is it true that Ryan was so upset that he wasn't nominated for an Oscar? He didn't go with her to the
I don't
Oscar
think that's
ceremony?
the reason he didn't go. Maybe it is. I never discussed it with him, but he didn't go to the ceremony. And maybe it was he was upset that he hadn't gotten nominated.
Why would you not go with your daughter, your little daughter, who's nominated for an Academy Award? I mean, I don't understand actors.
Well, that's true. Actors sometimes are difficult to understand. I didn't go either, because I wasn't nominated.
Oh, okay. Well.
Yeah, I'm not going to go. They didn't nominate me. We got 4 nominations, and she won.
Well, you must have been very proud.
I couldn't believe it. I was sitting there saying, she won. Jesus Christ. I can't believe it. It was amazing. She was sweet. I was touched when she thanked me. I want to thank my father and my director.
Do you see her? Have you seen her?
Occasionally, now and again. She's had so many problems, poor thing. See, the thing was, Vittorio De Sica, who made a very fine, was a brilliant actor and a pretty good director, made a film called Bicycle Thief, which had a very small child in it. And he said to the father, of the child, look, this kid doesn't know what he's doing. I'm going to manipulate this performance. I'm going to get this performance out of him. But he doesn't know what he's doing. He's not an actor. You must promise me that you won't let him act until he's over 18 and can make up his own mind. And the father promised, and that's what happened. The kid became an architect, didn't want to be an actor. So I said the same thing to Ryan. I told him the story, and I said, don't let her act. Well, you know, she went from getting $15,000 on Paper Moon to being offered $500,000 on her next picture, and nobody could resist the money. So she went acting, and she didn't know what she was doing. She had a very tough time.
And then that family, I guess, it was very difficult in her family.
Dysfunctional, yeah.
Yeah. You, meanwhile, were riding about as high as it's possible to ride in Hollywood, and it seemed like people were just waiting for you to step wrong. And then the next film was Daisy Miller.
Yeah.
your vehicle for Sybil.
Yeah, that was a interesting picture. We got some very good reviews. We got some bad reviews. The picture didn't do any business. I didn't think it would do any business, but I thought I'd had 3 hits in a row. I could afford one that wasn't a hit, but you can't. You can't afford to make a picture that's not going to make money. Howard Hawks said to me, "Peter, make pictures that make money." And he did, boy. He did. He did 11 in a row that were hits. You know that from 1939 to 1951, he had 11 hits in a row.
Well, then came 2 extremely ambitious flops for you, one after another, that were, really ambitious movies in which you tried to do something that had never been done before, and you were crucified for it. At Long Last Love and Nickelodeon.
Yeah. Yeah, Sybil and I used to refer to At Long Last Love as the debacle. The review in the Village Voice summed it, the headline of the review in the Village Voice summed it up. At long last lousy. Andy Saris wrote the piece, and I remember running into him we were friends, and I remember running into him in a theater, and he said, "I didn't write that headline in the review." I said, "Well, you wrote the rest of it, didn't you?" He never forgot that. He was being interviewed for a documentary about me, and he remembered that story, and he sort of said he felt he'd been a little rough on me. But anyway, At Long Last Love was, it's very difficult to make an original musical. It was all Cole Porter songs, but the story was original. And, this story, you don't even know, this story has a happy ending. It didn't at the time, but it's such a long story I can't begin to tell you. But if you do a original musical on Broadway, you preview it, maybe for 2 months, 3 months. You go on the road, you take a song out, you put a song back, you take out a whole scene, you put another song in. It's a huge process doing an original musical, because the biggest problem in doing a musical is the balance between songs and dialogue. How many scenes without songs, how many scenes with songs, and so on. Well, we had 2 previews. 2. The studio loved the picture, and they wanted to rush it out. They had a great booking at the Radio City Music Hall, and they thought we should put this out, it's great. And I was never happy with the cut. But it opened and got killed, except for 1 or 2 reviews that were quite good. And Newsweek was pretty good, and Dear Roger Ebert was quite good. And but the picture wasn't right. And I then recut it and for television, and it still wasn't right. But for years, people would come up to me and say, "I saw that film on television. Why did it get such bad reviews?" I said, "Well, it's not the version that was released." Now, unbeknownst to me, David, and you don't know this, Steve, because it just happened, about a year ago, somebody calls me up and says, Netflix is streaming At Long Last Love. It never had been put on DVD or videotape or anything. So I said, "Really?" So I looked at Netflix and I started to watch the streaming, and I said, "Well, where did they get that scene? I cut that out." There's another scene came up, and I said, "I cut that out. Where did they get the scenes?" And the picture was a whole different version than I'd ever seen. It was quite close to the original first preview and quite close to the original script, but certain choices were different. Scenes were shorter, some scenes were longer. It was, you know what happened? I said, I called Fox and I said, where did this version, what is this version of the picture? And it was good, by the way. I loved it. Well, it turns out that a guy in the 20th Century Fox editorial department, he'd been the head of the department for years, a guy named Jim Blakely, who had died about a year before, had been a big Cole Porter fan, and had been involved with musical comedy, and he had, unbeknownst to me, who had Final Cut, by the way, recut the picture and put it back the way he thought it should be. And that version, I said, how long has this been in circulation? Oh, since about 1979, about 4 years after the picture opened. I said, Jesus Christ, for all these years I thought that was my TV version. It was his version that people liked. I didn't even know it. So we previewed it, and it was they gave me an award in Temecula, California, and I said, let's run At Long Last Love, because Sybil was going to present the award. And we ran this version of At Long Last Love, and people loved it. Then we ran it at Fox, and people loved it. So Fox said, let's put it out on DVD. So it's coming out in June.
I have to apologize to y'all. You know, we're up to the mid-70s, and I could really talk to Peter Bogdanovich for hours and hours and hours, but I don't know if anybody could listen for hours and hours and hours.
And his throat couldn't hold out too much longer.
And his throat couldn't hold out. But, you know, we're skipping over some films that really deserve to be rediscovered, like St. Jack, where you kind of picked yourself up and went off to Thailand and with Singapore with Ben Gazzara, and you went to a lot of whorehouses and made a really wonderful picture as a result. Very.
It was about a pimp. It wasn't.
Yeah.
That made it sound like, you know, we just went to a bunch of whorehouses. It was about a whorehouse and a pimp.
Yeah, I should have spelled that out. And
it made me look a little better.
And I'm not worried about that. But then you did They All Laughed, a wonderful film called They All Laughed, which has been, I'm happy to say, rediscovered. And you know, these films from the middle period are actually being rediscovered now and are getting, I hope will get the audience they deserve on DVD and in retrospective showings. We have to say a few words about your resurgence as an actor, beginning with The Sopranos, leading to this wonderful film, Pasadena. Can you talk at all about how you were cast in The Sopranos as the psychiatrist of the psychiatrist, what you made of that, and how it relaunched your career? I know, in addition to the fact that you're still directing, but as an actor as well.
Well, it connects with Orson, strangely enough. In 1992, a book that I had worked on with Orson called This is Orson Welles, and a long interview book, which, for a long, long story, it didn't come out until 7 years after he died. But it came out, and David Chase, who created The Sopranos, was at that time doing a series called Northern Exposure. And he called me out of the blue and said, look, we're going to do an episode of Northern Exposure where we're going to do sort of a tribute to Orson Welles. And since you wrote this book and so on, we'd like you to come up to Seattle where we shoot and play yourself. And we'll send a writer to interview you and talk about what you like to eat and what you're doing right now, and we'll put it all into the script. Would you play yourself? And I said, oh, sure, of course I would. It would be fun. And so I went to Seattle. We shot for a week. After the second day of shooting, David calls me. He says, have you ever acted before? I said, yeah, what's wrong? No, nothing. You're terrific. He says, you have a lot of presence. You ought to act more. I said, oh, thank you. I started as an actor. Well, you ought to do more of it. Oh, well. 7 years later, I get another call from David Chase. He says, we're doing the second season of a show called The Sopranos, and we wanted to know if you'd like to play Tony Soprano is giving his therapist so much trouble that she needs to go to a psychiatrist. Wanted to know if you'd like to play the psychiatrist. I said, well, yeah, I'd be thrilled. Well, come on down and meet with the writers. So I met with the writers and David and so on, and they said, we talked for about 45 minutes. I went home, David called me and said, you got the part. I said, well, great. And that was the beginning of, I think I did about 16 or 17 episodes.
May I ask you, well, when you said you came down to talk, what did they talk with you about to see
Nothing, just chatted.
They didn't tell you their problems and see how you reacted?
No, they didn't. There was no audition, it was just chatting. I guess they thought I had presence.
Had you seen the show at that point?
I sure as hell saw it after that. I hadn't seen it before, no. It's a great show. It was so much fun. I directed one episode too. That was fun. It was a divine experience, you know.
Now, Lorraine Bracco is a very high-spirited character off the set, and yet she was relatively buttoned in for, and all of your scenes really were with her.
Lorraine, pretty much.
Yeah.
I had one sort of encounter with Tony Soprano in a parking lot, but other than that, it was mostly with Lorraine. Yeah.
And what was that acting relationship like over 5 years?
Oh, it was great. We had a lot of fun. We just did it, you know. It really was. The script was very good. The lines were very good. You couldn't change a line or add a line or change a comma without getting David's permission. And I remember it was very funny. The very last show, David directed it. He directed the first and the last. And it was a little scene with Lorraine where she's crying and I hand her a Kleenex. I had no dialogue. And David is off behind the set in front of the monitor, and he yells out, "Ask her a question." Ask her a question. You know, we hadn't been able to change a word, much less ad-lib a line. So I asked her a question. He yells out, "Ask her a better question." I said, "Fuck you, David. You're the writer. You tell me what to say, and I'll say it." So he gave me a question. Anyway, the whole thing wasn't in the scene. Wasn't in the show.
Oh.
It was a lot of fun to do it. It was really a lot. It changed. You know, for years people kept saying I was a critic who became a director, and after The Sopranos, they finally got it right. I was an actor who became a director, who became a critic, who became a director. That was the sequence of events.
That's going to be your epitaph?
Yeah.
So Pasadena, a very interesting performance because you play about half of it in a kind of stupor. I mean, you are a man who is so encased within his own grief and sense of failure that we look at you, we stare into your face looking for the smallest of responses. I mean, you made a very interesting choice to sort of, I think, to play that man as so inward, I guess you would say, so locked away. That must have been kind of scary to do, in a way.
Well, it was written that way, you know. Will Slocum wrote a very good script. That's why I wanted to do it. It was really good, and it was obviously personal to him. It was based on his own family, and it was very well written, and he was a director who knew what he wanted, which is rare. And it wasn't really a choice. It was just the way it came out, you know. I don't remember making a conscious choice. The guy was sort of never really quite there. He was also drinking a lot, and I don't drink, but I know what it's like. He sort of checked out. He's not really there. He's sort of somewhere else most of the time. And it was interesting to play that, you know, kind of vague. My father was a little like that at times, because my father was a painter, and you know, painters get into painting, and when they stop painting, they're still painting. My mother he'd be sitting at dinner, and my mother would say, "Boris, stop painting." So a little bit of distance. I think this character is sort of in his own head and thinking about a lot of things, or he's in a blank, stoned out place.
I saw
it was very well written.
You were sitting next to Alicia Witt, and I, for some reason, was sat next to her at the premiere, and I heard you turn to her after some of her big scenes and say that was extraordinary. I mean, you were telling her as it was going on how
well,
great you thought she was.
She's wonderful in the picture, I think. All the actors are terrific in the picture, which speaks well of the director. When the whole cast is so good, well cast and well directed, and well written. I thought all the performances were very good, particularly Alicia and Sonia and Cheryl. All the women were terrific, and the boy was good too. Everybody was good, I thought.
What is it like for you nowadays to be in Hollywood? Someone who is, battered but back up, and meeting a new generation of directors, just as you once sought out the great directors. Now I imagine there are young directors like Wes Anderson and Noah Baumbach who seek you out, who talk to you about your work.
They're very kindly going to produce my next picture, Wes and Noah. Wes has become a good friend, and Noah also. I acted in one of Noah's movies.
Mr. Jealousy, right?
Mr. Jealousy, and I love him, and I love Wes. They both call me Pop, and I call them Son. Son Wesley and Son Noah. And I said, it's okay for them to call me Pop. So they're producing it. I'm going to make a picture this summer in New York called Squirrels to the Nuts. It's a comedy. With Owen Wilson and Jennifer Aniston and maybe, I don't print it because it's not definite, but maybe Benicio del Toro.
Oh, that would be great.
Playing a movie star. It's a screwball comedy. I can't tell you much more about it. It's too complicated to explain. But it's a wild comedy.
And the script came to you?
No. This is something that
you wrote it?
I wrote with my second ex-wife, Louise Stratton, who's my dearest friend, actually. We're not married any longer, but she's my dearest friend in the world. And we wrote it together some years ago, and we brought it up to date when we decided to do it now.
You directed Noises Off, so you have an affinity for farce.
I like to do comedy. It's the toughest thing to do, but I love doing it. It's fun. I like Noises Off was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful play.
Yeah.
That's a play within a play.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you also have a very, very good relationship, I gather, with Sybil Shepherd. You've been...
Sybil and I are very close, yeah. We talk once a week or every other week, yeah. She cries on my shoulder about her current boyfriend.
It's interesting how you've managed to stay, you've been through such tumultuous things, and yet you've managed to be close to her and to your second ex-wife, and I guess you were close to Polly Platt up until the end as well. The father of your daughter.
We had a tough time, Polly and I. We had a very bad relationship for many, many years, unfortunately, and we sort of made up toward the end. She had a very tough exit, and very tough, and so we became closer toward the end, but it wasn't good for many years.
Do you have perspective on the way Hollywood, apart from the obvious, the way that Hollywood takes people who are oftentimes very, very nice, very open, very innocent, and turns them into monsters and creates all this horror and deviance and everything else in such a short time?
Well, it's a difficult place, Hollywood isn't any different from the rest of the world. It's just more so, because there's more money and more money involved, and fame, and you're in the spotlight, and the things that you do wrong get out to the public more than an average person. It's just like the rest of the world, only more so, as I said.
Are you? Do you feel like you're less vulnerable to a lot of those things than you used to be? Did you get a lot out of your system?
I don't know quite how to take that, David. I guess so. I've gotten older. You're supposed to get wiser when you get older. I don't know if that's true, but...
You were handed an enormous amount of power. You had access to these beautiful, beautiful women, unimagined luxury, people fawning all over you. You had a very kind of public fall, and you picked yourself up and created this second half of a career that I think people are still discovering it and learning how many beautiful and kind of true works of art have been a part of this second part of your career.
Well, thank you, David. I just kept going. Just keep going. I was helped by the love of some great women, including Dorothy Stratton and her sister Louise, and her mother, their mother, Nellie Hook Stratton, three amazing women. And Sybil was helpful. And the legacy of my parents was there for me too. They were quite extraordinary people. And then I also was fortunate enough to win the trust of a lot of older directors and a lot of older stars, and was able to write some interesting books about them. Who the Devil Made It and Who the Hell's in It, which I think are, have gotten good reactions.
They're marvelous. If you haven't seen them, big fat books that you could spend hours and hours reading.
It took a long time to get them together. Yeah. I'm doing a big book now, a diary book based on a diary I kept between 1965 and 1971, a very tumultuous period in my life. It's called My First Picture Shows, a director's apprenticeship, and it's all based on these journals I kept for 7 years.
Up through the last picture show.
Up through it about to open. It ends with the breakup of the marriage and falling in love with Sybil and all that, which was traumatic. We're going to end on a happy note or what?
Well, the gentleman over there had a very good question, which is that you learned in the Wild Angels and Targets and Last Picture Show how to cut a film, and he wanted to know specifically what you learned. And I mentioned something I'd read in your book. I think it was Hitchcock who complained about Monty Clift being too sort of method actory and not giving him the movement he wanted so that he could cut on the movement. And I wondered if that had anything to do with
No, he complained because he wanted Monty to look up so that he could cut to his point of view of something up there.
Right.
A window.
Right. But didn't he also say you
Monty
cut on
says, I don't know if I would look up. And he said, well, you've got to look up, because if you don't look up, I can't cut. So that was that story. But I learned, I learned a lot about what you don't need when you're making a picture. I learned about what not to shoot. I learned that you only shoot what you need, because otherwise you have to look at a lot of crap that you're not going to use, and then somebody else can make a decision and put it in behind your back, which if you don't shoot it, they haven't got it. There's a great story about John Ford. I don't know if I have the health to tell it, but anyway, he was shooting How Green Was My Valley, one of the great films, and in the story, Maureen O'Hara is in love with a preacher played by Walter Pidgeon, and she can't marry him for various reasons because it's frowned upon, so she marries somebody she doesn't love. And after the wedding, she gets into the carriage and they drive away, and she's obviously very unhappy. And as the carriage clears in the distance, very far in the distance, under a tree, you see the man she does love standing, looking at her going away. Very small figure. So they made the shot, and Artie Miller, the cameraman, comes over to Ford and says, Jack, do you think we should get a close-up of Walter under the tree? And Ford says, oh, Jesus, no, they'll just use it.
Do you find that, we're going to get to the other question in a second, but do you find that I've noticed, for example, that Woody Allen seems to have pared down his technique. I mean, now he does, when some filmmakers get older, they get simpler. They do things with much more simplicity, more economy. less fuss, less of those inserts. You know, do you find that as a rule that that's true based on the directors that you've loved and your own thinking?
I think the more pictures you make, the more you know exactly what you need and what you want, and you don't shoot stuff you don't need and don't want. And particularly, I had the experience in the 90s of doing quite a few television films and quite a few things for television where you don't have a lot of time. You don't have more than 20 days, 24 days, 19 days, and so on. You can't afford luxury shots. You can't afford to shoot things that you know you may not need. So you just shoot what you need, and I like that better. This new film we're making, we only have 32 days. Now that would have been unheard of for me back in the day. I would have said I can't do it. Now I can do it, but it's not easy, but I can do it.
One of my favorite sections in Who the Devil Made It is your interview with Edgar Ulmer, who of course by the end was making films absurdly fast.
Yeah, 6 days you'd shoot a picture.
Yeah. Yeah, and yet he was one of your idols, right?
Well, he wasn't an idol of mine. I respected him, and I thought it was amazing what he could do with nothing. Sometimes the nothing got the better of him, but I wouldn't say he was an idol of mine, but he was an interesting director, and I thought it'd be interesting to talk to him, and it was interesting to talk to him.
The question was about the 21st century and what the filmmakers in the last 10 years or so whose work you've responded, what you've thought of it, what you thought of the kind of the new breed of director.
Well, I don't know. I like Wes Anderson. I think he makes pictures that are personal to him, and you know who made the picture. You know, that's where I got the title, Who the Devil Made It, when I said to Howard Hawks, what directors do you like, have you liked over the years? And Howard said, well, I liked almost anybody that made you realize who the devil was making the picture, because the director's the storyteller, and he ought to have his own way of telling it. Well, I feel that's true of Wes. I feel it's true of Noah Baumbach. I feel it's true of Quentin Tarantino, although I don't like the subject matter of a lot of Quentin's movies because it's too violent for me. But he certainly knows how to tell a story visually. And there's a few others. I don't see as many movies. I don't like, there's too much violence in movies these days. And I think it's affecting the people. I think all this violence that we have in daily life with these horrible massacres and so on are affected by these movies and video games that as Orson Welles used to say, debase the audience. Orson said in the 70s, we're going to end up like the Roman circus, you know. I said, what's that? Well, the Roman circus ended up with, you know, sex, lovemaking, or sex, and killing live from the Colosseum. And we're I don't know what the word is, not debasing. There's another word I'm looking for. You know what I'm trying to say?
Well, corroding, degrading. Oh, you mean coarsening?
Yeah, and it makes you sort of think, oh, it's okay to have 50 people get killed in a movie. That's nothing big. Listen, my family was involved in a murder. Dorothy Stratton was murdered. Desensitizing, thank you, that's the word. Desensitizing, and you know, we had a murder in our family, and one murder is enough, you know. 50 is too much. One is enough to tell a story. You don't have to kill 30 people to make a point. And people who have a murder in their life, they don't recover.
Pauline Kael, when she saw The French Connection, which she didn't like, said that she worried that it was there was going to be a future in which movies were just going to be jolts for jocks. And
that's a good line.
And I thought, nowadays, if you meet a kid and you say that to a kid would probably say, were movies ever anything but jolts for jocks?
Well, they haven't seen any movies that were made before about 10 years ago. You know, I've been teaching at a university in North Carolina for a couple of years, a job I have not liked. And, you know, the kids think they know something because they saw Raging Bull. And I say, well, have you seen, you know, anything made before 1960? Not really. The golden age of Hollywood was a great period. They made a lot of crap, but they made some great films. We haven't equaled that period yet.
Yeah. My teenage daughter doesn't like to watch old movies. Like we tried to show her Say Anything by Cameron Crowe. That's an old movie from 1984. It's really striking to me how they will not, and that's maybe one of the things I love about Pasadena, the rhythms of Pasadena. The story takes as much time as the story takes.
And it's about people. It's about people. There's nothing more interesting than people. I don't care about special effects. Going way back to the beginning, the first big star in American pictures was Douglas Fairbanks. And when he jumped up on a table, he really jumped on the table. They didn't fake it. When Buster Keaton fell down and hit his head and did a twist, and that was Buster Keaton. When Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers danced, they were dancing. When Gene Kelly danced, he was dancing. They didn't have to fake it, trick it up, put CGI and crap. Now, the whole point of movies was suspension of disbelief. Now everybody says, well, that's just a trick. It's all a trick now. They had the tiger in The Life of Pi, and I said, oh, they have a tiger in this thing? No, it's all CGI. Well, who the hell gives a shit? I don't want to see a CGI tiger. They can do that. They can do anything. So who cares? It's like Renoir said, when we achieve perfect realism, we will achieve perfect decadence. And that's where we are now.
That actually is a really good note on, well, sad note on which to end, but I will...
No, we got to end with a couple of jokes.
Okay. Well...
Let me tell you two stories quickly.
Okay.
It was 1963, Hitchcock, 64, Hitchcock came to New York to open a picture called Marnie. And he invited me up to his suite for a drink. Do you know this story?
No.
And I got to his suite at the St. Regis, and he said, would you like a frozen daiquiri? Alma and I have had a few. There was a room service table full of frozen daiquiris, and Alma and Hitch had obviously had a couple because they were both red-faced. And I don't drink. I never did drink. But Hitch said, have a frozen daiquiri. So, it's Alfred Hitchcock. So I said, all right. So we talked for a little while. Hitch says, you're not drinking your drink. So I drank a little more, and after another 10 minutes, you're not drinking your drink. So I drank the whole damn thing. Well, I was feeling no pain. I had a definite buzz. Hitch said he had to go, so we walk out to the elevator, and I'm so dazed. I run out of questions. I couldn't even think. I was buzzed. Famished, yeah. So, so we get in the elevator, and nobody's saying anything. It stops we're on the 25th floor. We stop at the 18th floor. 3 people get in, dressed for dinner. Hitch now turns to me and says, oh, it was quite shocking, there was blood everywhere. Blood on the wall, blood on the floor. Now, I'm so pissed that I think to myself, I've missed an entire paragraph somewhere. So he goes on, and he says, he was lying in a pool of blood. There was blood coming out of his ear. Now, everybody knew who this guy was because Hitch had his own television show for 10 years, so everybody knew who it was. It was as famous as Clint Eastwood. The door opens on the 15th floor. 3 more people get in the elevator, and he goes on. I was looking down at this man, and he was bleeding all from his mouth and his ear, and he was still alive, and I said to him, good God, man, what's happened to you? And do you know what he said to me? And just as he says that, the doors to the lobby open, and everybody in the elevator goes, no, but nobody wants to get out of the elevator. But of course they have to, so they get out of the elevator, they cluster by the door, and Hitch just walks straight by them. No, I'm so completely famished at this point that I turned to Hitch as we were walking across the lobby, and I said, "So, what did he say, Hitch?" He said, "What? Oh no, that's just my elevator story."
You know, I realized that I had read that. I realized I had read that in your book, and I was about to give the punchline, and then I thought you had trained me well.
Then one other story, which isn't that funny, but it's got a great finish. I think we should end with this because it sums up what we've both been trying to say about movies. What you do very well in your writing. When you write about movies, you write about them with passion and with intensity and with not superficially. And I was interviewing Jimmy Stewart for a piece I did in Esquire, and we were talking about what is it about movies that makes them so special. And we were sort of talking about it, and Jimmy says, "Well, you know, I was doing a picture in Western in Colorado, and we stopped for lunch, the usual terrible box lunch. And I was sitting there eating it, and this older fella comes over to me, and he says, 'You, Stewart?' And I said, Yeah. You said a poem once. That was good. Oh, thank you." And that's all he said, and he walked away. And I knew just what he meant. It was a scene in a picture we'd made 20 years before. It was just a short scene in a bar. And I'd said a poem. And he'd remembered it all these years. And I thought, now there is the great thing about the movies. Because if you're good, and God helps you, and you're lucky enough to have a personality that comes across, and then what you're doing is you're giving people little tiny pieces of time that they never forget. I've never heard a better definition of movies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for staying.